I still recall men like Sam Holloway, the kind who came back from the war between the states carrying more than just physical scars. Back in Arizona Territory, 1875, such men were common as cactus, each trying to put distance between themselves and whatever haunted them back east. Sam had built himself a hard-scrabble homestead 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, and folks respected his need for solitude. He wasn't unfriendly, just careful with his words and generous with his help when it mattered. What folks didn't know was that Sam's quiet life was about to be upended by a woman's whispered words. Strange how 3 simple words can change a man's path completely. When Eleanor Mason stumbled onto his property one autumn evening, neither of them could have imagined how their lives would become tangled together, or how they'd both find something neither expected to see again in this life, a chance at redemption. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Sam Holloway worked the fence line, his movements methodical despite the heat. 3 posts had washed out in last week's flash flood, the 3rd such deluge this summer. Territory folks called it the monsoon season, but Sam had seen enough real monsoons during the war to know better. Still, the damage was real enough. He paused to wipe sweat from his weathered brow, scanning the distant clouds building over the Dragoon Mountains. His right knee throbbed with the familiar ache that had followed him home from Gettysburg. 12 years gone by, but some souvenirs a man carries forever. "What do you make of those clouds, General?" Sam asked the chestnut gelding grazing nearby. The horse flicked an ear in acknowledgment, but continued cropping the sparse grasses. "I reckon we've got 3 hours before she hits. Plenty of time to finish this stretch." Talking to horses made more sense than talking to people most days. Horses didn't ask questions about where you'd been or what you'd seen. They didn't look at you with pity when your hands trembled for no good reason, or when you woke shouting in the night. Sam drove another salvaged cedar post into the softened ground, tamping the earth firmly around its base. 12 good posts, straight as a rifle barrel. That was the mark of a man who took pride in his work, whether anyone ever saw it or not. He'd learned that from his father, long before he'd learned about killing. A distant rumble of thunder made him flinch slightly, his hand instinctively moving toward the Remington he no longer carried on his hip. The war had taught him to associate sudden sounds with danger, a lesson his body refused to unlearn. "Just thunder, General," he said quietly, as much to himself as to the horse. "Storm's heading east of us. Won't be another deluge today." He patted his pocket, feeling the small tin of salve he'd made from mesquite and creosote. Good for the fence posts, better for his knee when the weather turned. Sam worked steadily, finishing the fence with the precision that had once made him one of the 5th Pennsylvania's best sharpshooters. The skill remained, though he hadn't fired at a man since Appomattox. These days, his shots were reserved for rabbits, deer, and the occasional coyote that got too interested in his chickens. As he gathered his tools, something caught his eye. Tracks in the sandy soil, fresh ones heading toward his property. Not wagon wheels or horse hooves, but boot prints. Someone on foot, moving with purpose. In these parts, folks didn't walk 15 miles to pay a social call. Sam studied the tracks with narrowed eyes, medium build from the depth, favoring the right leg slightly. Moving fast, despite that, heading straight for his homestead. "Looks like we've got company coming, General," he said, loading his tools into the saddlebag. "Best head back and see what kind of troubles found us." The trading post at Sulphur Springs wasn't much, a single-story adobe building with a tin roof and a sagging porch. But it served as the lone outpost of civilization in 30 square miles of harsh country. Sam made the 15-mile ride once a month, no more. People were something to be rationed. like water in August. "Morning, Sam," called Abner Green from behind his rough-hewn counter. At 65, Abner had seen the territory change hands from Mexico to the United States, and he'd been running the trading post nearly as long. "Your usual orders ready. Added that liniment you wanted." Sam nodded, the gesture economical as everything else about him. "Much obliged." 3 words, a veritable speech by his standards. Abner wasn't deterred by Sam's brevity. "Jenkins brought in some fresh beef yesterday. Thought you might want a cut before it's gone." "Can use it," Sam said, examining the wrapped package Abner produced. He counted out coins carefully, his large hands surprisingly nimble with the small currency. The door creaked open, admitting Dr. Miles Harrison, his medical bag in hand. The gray-haired physician brightened at the sight of Sam. "Holloway, just the man. That willow bark tincture you made last winter. Anything left? Mrs. Peterson's rheumatism is flaring something fierce." Sam hesitated. Engaging meant more conversation, more questions, but refusing help wasn't in his nature, despite his preference for solitude. "Made a fresh batch last month," he said finally. "Can bring it by tomorrow." "You're a godsend," Harrison said. "Between us, that tincture works better than half the medicines in my bag. Don't know how we managed that influenza outbreak before you came along." Sam's discomfort was visible only in the slight tightening around his eyes. The doctor meant well, but the reminder of the epidemic 2 winters ago brought back too many memories of makeshift field hospitals, of men dying despite his best efforts, of failure. Before he could respond, a young ranch hand hurried in, hat clutched respectfully in his hands. "Mr. Holloway, sir. Pa sent me to ask. Our mare's favoring her front leg, something awful, and that salve you made last time." "I'll bring some," Sam interrupted, uncomfortable with the naked gratitude in the boy's eyes. "Tomorrow, with the doctor's tincture." The boy beamed. "Much obliged, sir. That last batch, Pa says you saved us $50 in farrier bills." Sam nodded again, turning back to his supplies. 3 conversations in 5 minutes, more than enough human interaction for one day. Abner waited until the boy left before leaning across the counter, voice lowered. "Heard Caldwell bought out the Wilson place. That makes 3 spreads this year." Sam continued checking his supplies, seemingly indifferent. "Man's entitled to expand his business." "Maybe so. But there's talk about how he's persuading folks to sell. Jackson's widow had mighty peculiar timing, getting that fever right after refusing his first offer." This caught Sam's attention, though he revealed it only by the slightest pause in his movements. "Fever can take anyone." "True enough. But fever that clears up right after she signs the deed." Abner shook his head. "Caldwell's got his eye on every water source between here and the Chiricahuas. Man's building himself a kingdom." "Good thing I'm not looking to sell," Sam replied, securing his supplies to General Saddle. "Good thing you don't have a creek running through your property," Abner countered. "Otherwise, you might find yourself with interested buyers, whether you're looking to sell or not." Sam said nothing to this, merely tipped his hat in farewell. As he mounted General, he caught sight of a group of riders at the far end of the settlement, well-dressed men on expensive horses. One pointed in his direction, saying something that made the others laugh. Sam recognized Victor Caldwell at the center of the group, though they'd never spoken. The man had politician's eyes, smiling while calculating your worth down to the penny. Sam turned General toward home, putting the settlement and its complications behind him. The solitude of his homestead called to him like a promise of peace, though the conversation about Caldwell left him with an uneasy feeling he couldn't quite shake. Dusk was settling over the land as Sam approached his homestead, the adobe walls glowing amber in the dying light. The modest house, barn, and chicken coop represented 3 years of backbreaking work, a refuge built by his own hands, far from the memories of war and loss that had driven him west. General's ears pricked forward suddenly, his steady gait faltering. Sam immediately tensed, his senses sharpening with the instincts that had kept him alive through 4 years of war. Something was wrong. The tracks he'd noticed earlier continued toward his property, but now there were others, horsemen, at least 4, riding heavy. They'd circled his house before heading back the way they'd come, no more than an hour ago. More concerning was what awaited him at home. The barn door stood slightly ajar when he knew he'd left it secured. Chickens pecked nervously in their yard rather than roosting as they should at this hour. Someone was here, someone who didn't want to be seen. Sam dismounted silently, securing General to a mesquite tree well back from the house. He retrieved his Winchester from its scabbard, checking that a round was chambered. Moving with the quiet precision of a man accustomed to stalking prey, human and animal alike, he approached the barn. No sound came from within, but Sam's instincts told him he wasn't alone. He positioned himself beside the door, rifle ready, and listened. The faintest rustle from the hayloft confirmed his suspicions. "I've got a Winchester aimed at that loft," he called, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable authority of a man who meant exactly what he said. "You've got one chance to come down slow and explain yourself before I put a hole through the floorboards." Silence stretched for several heartbeats, then a woman's frightened voice responded, "Please, don't shoot." This caught Sam off guard, though his expression remained impassive. Women were scarce in this part of the territory, and those who traveled alone usually had good reason to fear men more than the desert. "Come down where I can see you," he ordered, maintaining his position. Straw rustled as a slender figure emerged from the shadows. She descended the ladder slowly, each movement tentative. When she turned to face him, Sam saw a young woman perhaps in her mid-20s, her dress torn and dusty, her face bearing the unmistakable marks of recent bruising. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had nowhere else to go." Sam lowered his rifle slightly, though he remained watchful. The woman before him was clearly in distress, but experience had taught him that desperation made people unpredictable. "Who are you?" he asked. "And who's following you?" She swayed slightly, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "My name is Eleanor Mason, and if they find me—" Her voice faltered. "I'm not clean," she whispered, and something in her voice, a mixture of shame and fear so profound it transcended ordinary caution, made Sam lower his rifle an inch. Sam set his Winchester aside, but kept it within reach as he studied Eleanor Mason. The bruises on her face told a story he'd seen before, the kind of story that ended badly for women alone in the territory. "You'd best come inside," he said, his voice remaining neutral. "Can't talk properly in a barn." He led her to the house, maintaining a respectful distance. The single-room adobe was spare but orderly, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves lined with supplies. Everything had its place, like a military barracks. Sam poured water from a ceramic pitcher into a tin cup and set it on the table. "Drink," he said, then stepped back to give her space. "When you're ready, explain what you meant by not clean." Eleanor approached cautiously, her hands trembling as she took the cup. She drank deeply, thirst overcoming fear. Sam noted the quality of her dress, torn and dusty now, but once fine. Not a working girl then, educated, from her speech. "Typhoid," she said finally, voice barely above a whisper. Last winter, I survived, but... She looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. People still treat me like I'm carrying death. Typhoid doesn't linger once it's gone, Sam said matter-of-factly. Folks who think otherwise are just ignorant. Something in his practical assessment seemed to steady her. It wasn't just that, she continued. Caldwell doesn't want me. He wants my father's land, the mine. Sam's expression didn't change, but his attention sharpened at the name. Victor Caldwell? She nodded. You know him? Know of him. Sam remained standing, arms crossed. What's a mine got that Caldwell wants besides silver? Evidence. Eleanor's knuckles whitened around the cup. My father knew things. About Caldwell. About what happened at Willow Creek. Willow Creek? The name stirred something in Sam's memory. Something from the war years. 1864. While the country was focused on the war, Caldwell ordered his men to clear out a settlement of miners who'd staked claims near the dragoons. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, as though telling the truth itself gave her courage. 23 people killed, families, children, all because they'd found a rich vein on land Caldwell wanted. Sam's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. War makes good cover for men who want to settle private business. My father was an army surgeon stationed at Fort Bowie at the time. He treated the few survivors. Eleanor set down her cup. He kept records, names, statements, proof that Caldwell ordered the massacre. And Caldwell knows your father had this evidence? She nodded. He offered to buy our land at first. When father refused, things happened. Equipment failures. Livestock dying mysteriously. Her voice faltered. 3 weeks ago, father was found dead at the bottom of a mine shaft. They called it an accident. But you don't believe that. I know it wasn't. Her eyes held a certainty born of grief. The day before, he told me he'd hidden the documents where Caldwell would never find them. Said if anything happened to him, I was to get them to Judge Wilson in Tucson. Sam processed this information with the methodical care of a man who'd learned to weigh life and death decisions. And now, Caldwell's forcing marriage to gain legal control of your property. Territory law gives a husband control of his wife's property. Eleanor's voice held bitter knowledge. He had the marriage contract drawn up the same day they buried my father. Sam's response was cut short by the sound of approaching horses. His reaction was immediate, the fluid movement of a man whose body remembered danger. Root cellar, he said tersely, moving to a worn rug in the corner and pulling it aside to reveal a trapdoor. Down. Not a sound. Eleanor didn't hesitate, descending quickly into the dark space beneath the floor. Sam replaced the rug, then checked the room for signs of her presence. He removed the second cup from the table just as hoofbeats thundered into the yard. Taking his Winchester, he stepped onto the porch, expression revealing nothing as 4 riders pulled up before him. The lead man, broad-shouldered, with a carefully trimmed mustache, wore the expensive clothes of a ranch foreman, not a working cowhand. Holloway, the man greeted him with a nod that held no friendliness. Name's Pike. I work for Mr. Victor Caldwell. What brings Caldwell's men to my place? Sam asked, leaning on his rifle in a posture that appeared casual but would allow for quick movement if needed. Looking for a young woman, Pike said, eyes scanning the property. Mr. Caldwell's intended bride. Seems she got confused and wandered off before the ceremony. Family's worried sick. Haven't seen any women around here, Sam replied evenly. Nearest female is Mrs. Green at the trading post, and she's past 60. Pike's smile didn't reach his eyes. Thing is, we followed tracks leading this direction. Girl's not right in the head. Typhoid fever last year left her addled, prone to making up stories. That so? Sam said. Seem to recall typhoid hits the body harder than the mind. The smile vanished from Pike's face. You calling me a liar, Holloway? Not calling you anything. Just saying I haven't seen any young woman on my property. Sam's voice remained level. Would have noticed something like that. One of the other men had dismounted and was examining the ground near the barn. He gave Pike a slight nod. Pike's gaze drifted past Sam to the house behind him. Mind if we take a look around? For the lady's safety, you understand. I mind, Sam said simply. My property. Dangerous country for a man living alone, Pike observed, eyes narrowing. Accidents happen, Apache raids, bandits. Man could die out here, nobody'd know for days. Man could, Sam agreed, meeting Pike's stare, if he wasn't careful. Pike's attention shifted to the table visible through the open door where 2 cups sat. Expecting company, Holloway? Sam didn't follow his gaze. Man gets thirsty working fence lines all day. 2 cups? First one had dirt in it. A tense silence stretched between them. Pike finally broke it with a laugh that held no humor. Well, if you do happen to see Miss Mason, you let her know Mr. Caldwell's mighty concerned for her welfare. We'll be back tomorrow to check again. He touched the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. Good day, Holloway. Sam remained motionless on the porch as the riders departed, watching until they disappeared from view. Only then did he return inside and remove the rug from the trapdoor. They're gone, he said, helping Eleanor up from the cellar, for now. Thank you, she said, brushing dirt from her skirt. The simple words carried the weight of genuine gratitude. They'll be back by morning, Sam said, moving to check his rifle. With more men. Why did you help me? Eleanor asked. You don't know me from Adam. You could have turned me over, avoided trouble. Sam continued his methodical check of the weapon, speaking without looking up. Man who'd force a woman to marry him, who'd kill her father, that man doesn't need a reason to come after someone like me next. He slid the rifle's action closed with a definitive click. Sooner or later, men like that need to be stopped. Eleanor studied him, seeing beyond his impassive exterior to the moral certainty beneath. They'll be back by morning, with more men. Then we'd best be gone before first light. Sam began gathering supplies with the efficiency of a man accustomed to quick departures. Where exactly is this evidence your father hid? The Blackthorn Mine, north side of the Dragoons. Eleanor hesitated. It's a 3-day ride. And we've got about 6 hours before dawn. Sam handed her a canteen. Pack light, we'll travel hard. As Eleanor helped prepare for their departure, Sam found himself drawn into a conflict he'd never sought. After years of keeping the world at arm's length, he was about to risk his life for a stranger's cause. Yet something in Eleanor's story had stirred what he'd thought long buried, a sense that some injustices simply couldn't be ignored, no matter how much a man might wish to remain uninvolved. The war had taught him the cost of standing against evil. Now, it seemed, he was about to relearn that lesson in the harsh landscape of the Arizona Territory. They traveled through darkness, keeping to the high desert scrubland where trees and rocky outcroppings offered some cover. Sam led them along game trails and dry washes where hoofprints wouldn't hold, avoiding the established routes where Caldwell's men would surely be watching. Dawn broke harsh and unforgiving across the eastern sky. The gentle promise of morning elsewhere was, in the Arizona Territory, more like nature's warning. Another day of merciless sun had begun. Sam studied the terrain ahead through narrowed eyes, then pointed toward a distant ridgeline. "We'll head for those hills. Better cover, and there's a spring I know of." Eleanor nodded, her face drawn with exhaustion. They'd been riding for nearly 6 hours, with only brief stops to rest the horses. Sam noticed her sway slightly in the saddle. "We'll rest at midday," he said, not looking at her directly. "Too dangerous to travel when the sun's high anyway. Glint off a buckle can be seen for miles." They rode in silence, the miles stretching beneath their horses' hooves. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they entered the foothills that would eventually lead to the Dragoon Mountains. Sam chose their path carefully, keeping to harder ground where possible. Around mid-morning, as they climbed a particularly steep incline, Eleanor's horse stumbled. She pitched forward, nearly falling from the saddle. Sam reacted instantly, his hand shooting out to catch her arm. "Sorry," she managed, steadying herself. "Not used to riding this long." Sam studied her face, too pale, too thin. The fever that had spared her life had clearly taken its toll on her strength. "Typhoid took more out of you than you let on." "I can keep going." Her jaw set with determination, chin lifting slightly in a gesture of pride. "Not questioning that," he replied evenly. "Just noting facts." They continued until they reached a sheltered ravine where scrub oak and juniper provided modest concealment. A small seep of water trickled from the rocks, enough to replenish their canteens and water the horses. "We'll stay here until dusk," Sam decided, helping Eleanor dismount. Her legs nearly buckled when they touched the ground, but she caught herself against the saddle, refusing his assistance. Sam respected her pride. He'd seen that same stubborn dignity in soldiers who'd marched until their feet bled rather than fall behind. Without comment, he busied himself unsaddling the horses and setting up a small camp. "No fire," he said. "Too risky." Eleanor nodded, easing herself down with her back against a boulder. "How far to the Blackthorn mine?" "At this pace, 2 more days. Would be faster on the main trails, but Caldwell will have men watching them," she finished. "I know." Sam pulled jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, offering her a share. They ate in silence, the harsh terrain stretching in all directions around them. After some time, Sam checked his pocket watch. "Get some sleep if you can," he said. "I'll keep watch." Eleanor studied him, her gaze direct despite her exhaustion. "You could still walk away from this," she said quietly. "Leave me with some supplies, head north. He doesn't want you, just me and those papers." Sam stared at the dry creek bed beyond their shelter, his expression unreadable. The suggestion had merit, tactically sound, reasonable. After a long moment, he spoke. "Tried walking away once before, after Chancellorsville." His voice was flat, distant. "Watched men die, while others looked the other way." He picked up a small stone, turning it over in his fingers. "Sometimes regret not dying there myself." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and unexpected. "But you didn't," Eleanor said softly. "No." Sam set the stone down with deliberate care. "And I'm not walking away now either." The simple declaration seemed to settle something within him. Eleanor nodded, understanding that further discussion was unnecessary. She leaned back against the rock and closed her eyes. Sam kept watch, his gaze constantly scanning their surroundings. The war had taught him to function on minimal sleep, to remain vigilant when others faltered. As the afternoon heat built to its crescendo, he allowed himself to acknowledge what he'd committed to, not just helping Eleanor reach the mine, but standing against Caldwell and all his resources. It wasn't a fight he'd sought, but somehow it felt like one he'd been preparing for without knowing it. Eleanor woke as shadows lengthened across the ravine. Sam was checking his rifle nearby, his movements practiced and efficient. She sat up, wincing at stiff muscles. "How's your leg?" she asked, noticing his slight grimace when he shifted position. Sam glanced up, surprised by the question. "It's fine." "You favor it when you think no one's watching," she observed. Old wound. A flicker of something, perhaps respect for her perception, crossed his face. Gettysburg, many a ball. Eleanor moved closer, her professional interest evident. "May I?" After a moment's hesitation, Sam rolled up his pant leg, revealing an ugly, puckered scar just above the knee. The surrounding skin showed signs of inflammation. "This is infected," she said, her tone shifting from exhausted traveler to something more confident, clinical. "It gets that way sometimes," Sam replied with a shrug. "Nothing serious." Eleanor reached for her small travel bag. "I have some things that might help. My father was a doctor. I helped with his patients." Sam watched with guarded curiosity as she produced a small tin and a clean cloth. "This is calendula salve with yarrow," she explained, opening the tin to reveal a yellowish ointment. "It'll draw out the infection." Her hands were steady and sure as she cleaned the wound with water from the canteen, then applied the salve with gentle efficiency. Sam observed her work with growing interest. "That's better," Eleanor said, finishing the fresh bandage on Sam's leg. It was festering. "Where'd you learn doctoring like that?" he asked, genuine curiosity replacing his usual reserve. "My father. He taught me everything he knew." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "Said a woman should be able to take care of herself in this territory." "Smart man," Sam acknowledged, testing his weight on the leg. The pain had already eased somewhat. He was. Eleanor returned the tin to her bag, then withdrew something else. Sam's Colt revolver, which he'd set aside while tending the horses. She handed it back to him, grip first, with the casual competence of someone familiar with firearms. "Also taught me to shoot." Said that was even more important for a woman alone. Sam took the weapon, reassessing his initial impression of Eleanor Mason, not just a doctor's daughter, but someone with practical skills and a clear-headed understanding of frontier realities. "Your father sounds like a man worth knowing," he said finally. He was. Her voice grew quieter. "Caldwell knew it too. That's why he had him killed." Sam checked his weapons one last time, then nodded toward the darkening sky. "We should move out. Cover more ground before full dark." As they prepared to leave, Sam found himself watching Eleanor with new appreciation. The determination that had initially seemed like mere stubbornness now revealed itself as something more substantial, a core of resilience that had survived both personal loss and physical illness. They mounted up, continuing their journey toward the Blackthorn mine. The path ahead would only grow more dangerous, but for the first time since leaving his homestead, Sam felt something beyond duty driving him forward. Perhaps it was the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who understood what it meant to carry on when everything had been taken away. They reached the foothills of the Dragoon Mountains on the second day, traveling by night and sheltering during daylight hours. The landscape grew increasingly rugged. Weathered spires of granite and limestone thrust upward from the earth like the bones of ancient creatures, creating a maze of canyons and ravines. Sam led them through a narrow pass, alert for any sign of pursuit. Caldwell's men remained persistent, Twice they'd spotted distant riders searching the valleys below, forcing them to change course and lose precious time. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they picked their way along a rocky slope. Sam raised his hand suddenly, signaling a halt. He dismounted silently, moving to a position behind a boulder where he could survey the trail ahead. "Someone's up there," he whispered when Eleanor joined him. "Been tracking us since dawn." Eleanor peered around the rock. The trail ahead curved around a jutting outcropping, creating a natural ambush point. "Caldwell's men?" "Don't think so." Sam's eyes narrowed. "Too careful. One rider, moving quiet." They waited, weapons ready. Minutes stretched into a tense half-hour before a single figure emerged around the bend, a Navajo man riding a sturdy paint pony. He wore simple buckskins, his hair tied back with a leather cord. Most striking were his eyes, calm, watchful, missing nothing. The man stopped his horse about 50 yards away, making no threatening moves, but clearly aware of their presence. "Gray Wolf," Sam said, his voice carrying across the distance. He stood slowly, keeping his rifle pointed downward. The Navajo nodded once in acknowledgement. "Holloway." Sam stepped into the open, gesturing for Eleanor to remain behind cover. He approached the rider with the measured caution of mutual respect rather than fear. "Long way from your territory," Sam observed when they were closer. "Not so far as it once was," Gray Wolf replied, his English clear but accented. "The white man's boundaries move like wind-blown sand." Eleanor watched from behind the boulder as the two men studied each other, recognizing a history between them that went unspoken. After a moment, Sam gestured for her to join them. "This is Eleanor Mason," he said simply. Gray Wolf's dark eyes assessed her with calm directness. "The man with the dead eyes searches for you both," he said. "His men ride all roads." "Caldwell," Sam confirmed with a nod. "We need to reach the Blackthorn mine," Sam continued, "northeast of here." Gray Wolf considered this information. "That is a 3-day journey by your paths." "His men watch the lower valleys and all water sources." "You know another way?" Sam asked. "My people will guide you through the high canyon," Gray Wolf replied. "No white man knows these paths." Eleanor looked between them, confused by this unexpected offer. "Why help us?" she asked directly. Gray Wolf turned to her, then back to Sam. His expression remained impassive, but something like respect flickered in his eyes. "3 winters ago, this man found my son, brought him home when others would have left him. A debt remains unpaid." Sam shook his head slightly. "No debt between us." "We do not see this the same way," Gray Wolf replied with quiet finality. "My people keep count of both kindness and cruelty." He whistled softly, and 2 more Navajo riders appeared from concealed positions. Positions Sam hadn't detected despite his vigilance. The realization was sobering. They could have been ambushed at any moment. "Come," Gray Wolf said. "We must reach the high ground before darkness falls." They made camp that night in a hidden valley accessible only through a narrow cleft in the rock, a place invisible from below and nearly impossible to find without a guide. Gray Wolf's companions, Two Feathers and Young Elk, maintained a quiet watchfulness, respectful but reserved. Around a small, carefully sheltered fire, Gray Wolf unfolded a piece of soft deerskin on which he had drawn a detailed map of the region. He marked their location with a small stone. "We are here," he said. "The mine you seek is here." He placed another stone at the northeastern edge of the map. "Caldwell's men watch these paths." His finger traced the established trails through the mountains. "But we can go this way." He indicated a faint line threading through seemingly impassable terrain. The old ones used these trails long before any mine existed. Sam studied the map intently. How long? 2 days if we push hard. The woman's strength concerns me. Eleanor straightened her back at this assessment. I'll keep up. Grey Wolf merely nodded, neither accepting nor rejecting her assertion. The papers prove Caldwell ordered the massacre, Eleanor explained, pulling their conversation back to purpose. Written orders to his men, signed in his hand. 26 people died, women and children too. We know of this killing, Grey Wolf said quietly. Some who fled came to our people for shelter. Sam rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Papers won't stop bullets, he observed. No, Eleanor acknowledged. But they'll stop him from coming after us once we get them to Judge Wilson in Tucson. He was my father's friend. Sam traced his finger along the route Grey Wolf had indicated. Getting them there is the trick. We will guide you to the mine, Grey Wolf said. After that, you must find your own path. Young Elk spoke for the first time, his voice low as he addressed Grey Wolf in Navajo. The older man listened, then turned to Sam. Caldwell's men have divided. Some follow your trail, others wait at the mine. Sam's expression hardened. How many? 4 at the mine entrance, others in the hills nearby. Sam considered this information with the tactical assessment of a veteran. We'll need a diversion. For the next hour, they planned their approach to the mine. Sam drew diagrams in the dirt, marking positions and considering alternatives. Eleanor contributed her knowledge of the mine's layout, while Grey Wolf offered insights on the terrain and potential escape routes. 2 feathers and Young Elk would create a distraction to draw away some of Caldwell's men, while Sam and Eleanor approached from an abandoned shaft Eleanor's father had shown her years before, a secondary entrance unlikely to be guarded. As the planning session concluded, Grey Wolf and his companions withdrew to the edge of the camp, giving Sam and Eleanor a measure of privacy. You trust him completely, Eleanor observed, not a question but an acknowledgement. Sam nodded. Grey Wolf doesn't say much, but every word carries weight. What happened with his son? Sam was quiet for a moment, poking at the fire with a stick. Found the boy half frozen in a canyon during a snowstorm 3 years back. Brought him to their settlement. Nothing special. But Eleanor understood from Grey Wolf's reaction that it had been far from ordinary. Most white men wouldn't have bothered, she said softly. Sam shrugged, uncomfortable with the implied praise. Boy was just a boy. Didn't matter whose. They sat in companionable silence for a time, each lost in thought. The mountain air grew chill as night deepened around them. What will you do after this is over? Eleanor asked finally. Sam looked up, genuinely surprised by the question. No one had asked him about the future in years. His life had become a series of days to be endured rather than a path leading somewhere. Haven't thought that far ahead, he admitted. I find that hard to believe, Eleanor said with a gentle skepticism. A man who plans as carefully as you do. Sam stared into the dying embers. Plans don't always work out. Learned that in the war. But you still make them. The firelight caught a ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth. Reckon I do. The admission felt significant somehow, an acknowledgement that despite everything, he hadn't completely given up on what might lie ahead. Eleanor seemed to understand the weight of it, asking nothing more. They turned in shortly after, each needing rest before the difficult journey ahead. As Sam settled his bedroll near the fire's fading warmth, he found himself considering Eleanor's question more seriously. What would he do when this was over? For years, his only goal had been distance. from the war, from people, from memories. Now, for the first time, he felt a tentative connection to something beyond mere survival. It was a strange feeling, uncomfortable, yet not entirely unwelcome. The Blackthorn mine rose before them like a jagged wound in the mountainside. Gray Wolf's guidance had brought them to an overlook just before dawn, providing a clear view of the operation below. What had once been a bustling silver mine now stood abandoned. Weathered timber frames, rusted equipment, and collapsing outbuildings bearing witness to dreams crushed by nature's indifference. Sam lay flat on his stomach at the ridge's edge, studying the scene through field glasses he'd carried since the war. Eleanor beside him, their shoulders nearly touching as they assessed what awaited them. 4 men at the main entrance, Sam murmured, shifting the glasses slightly. 2 more by that equipment shed. Another patrolling the perimeter. Caldwell's not taking chances, Eleanor whispered. Shows how important those papers are. Sam handed her the glasses. Where's this secondary entrance you mentioned? Eleanor scanned the hillside carefully. There. See that rock formation shaped like a wolf's head? The shaft entrance is just below it, hidden by scrub brush. Sam studied the approach. It was steep and exposed in places, but offered their best chance of reaching the mine undetected. Gray Wolf and his men will create a diversion at the south ridge, Sam said, indicating the opposite side of the valley. Once Caldwell's men are drawn away, we make our move. Eleanor nodded, her expression resolute. I should be the one to enter the mine. Sam frowned. Too dangerous. I know exactly where the documents are hidden. You don't. Her voice remained quiet but firm. Besides, I'm smaller. Can move through those narrow passages faster. Sam considered her argument, weighing tactical necessity against his instinct to protect. Finally, he gave a reluctant nod. You retrieve the documents. I'll cover you from that ridgeline. If trouble comes, you get out fast, documents or no documents. Eleanor's determination was evident in the set of her jaw. I'll get them. They returned to where Gray Wolf waited with his companions. It is time, the Navajo said simply. We will draw them south. You will have perhaps 15 minutes. Sam clasped the man's forearm in a gesture of respect. Thank you. Gray Wolf met his gaze. Return with the truth. Such men must be stopped, or they will devour everything. With that, he and his companions melted into the landscape, moving toward their positions. Sam turned to Eleanor. Ready? She nodded, checking the small revolver her father had given her. Ready. They waited in tense silence until the diversion began, a series of rifle shots followed by shouts of alarm from the mine entrance. Most of Caldwell's men moved immediately toward the south ridge, just as planned. Now, Sam whispered. They separated, Eleanor making her way down toward the hidden shaft entrance, while Sam positioned himself on a rocky outcropping that provided both cover and a clear field of fire. Through his rifle scope, Sam watched Eleanor reach the concealed entrance and disappear inside. 2 of Caldwell's men remained near the main entrance, but their attention was focused on the commotion to the south. Sam settled into the patient stillness of a marksman, his breathing slow and controlled, his finger resting lightly beside the trigger. He would not fire unless absolutely necessary. Gunshots would bring the others back immediately. Time stretched as he maintained his vigil. 5 minutes. 10. Eleanor should have found the documents by now. A movement at the main entrance caught his attention. A well-dressed man emerged from the mine, scanning the area with obvious irritation. Even from this distance, Sam recognized Victor Caldwell. The same man he'd seen at the trading post days earlier, now barking orders at his remaining men. Something had changed in the plan. Caldwell shouldn't have been here personally. Sam's unease deepened when he saw Caldwell gesture toward the hillside where the hidden entrance lay. Somehow, he knew about the secondary shaft. When Caldwell and one of his men started in that direction, Sam made his decision. He fired a single shot, deliberately missing, but striking the ground near enough to send them diving for cover. The distraction worked, but now his position was compromised. Return fire pinged off the rocks around him as he quickly relocated to another vantage point. Inside the mine, Eleanor moved through the narrow passages, guided by childhood memories of exploring these tunnels with her father. The air grew thick with dust and the lingering smell of blasting powder. Her small lantern cast jumping shadows on rough-hewn walls as she navigated deeper into the mountain. The particular shaft she sought branched off to the right, descending at a steep angle before leveling out into a chamber where her father had once found a promising vein of silver. It was there, in a crevice behind a rotting support beam, that he had hidden the documents proving Caldwell's guilt. Eleanor reached the chamber and located the beam, her heart pounding as she felt around in the darkness. Her fingers touched oilcloth, her father's careful wrapping to protect the papers from moisture. Relief washed over her as she pulled the packet free. A noise from the tunnel behind her froze Eleanor in place. Footsteps, too heavy to be Sam's. She quickly extinguished her lantern and pressed herself into a shadowed corner, clutching the documents to her chest. Heavy breathing and the beam of another lantern preceded the figure that entered the chamber. Victor Caldwell himself, a revolver in his free hand. "I know you're in here, Miss Mason," he called, his cultured voice echoing oddly in the confined space. "This little game has gone on long enough." Eleanor remained motionless, scarcely breathing. Caldwell moved the lantern slowly, its light sweeping across the chamber. "Your father was stubborn, too," he continued conversationally, "right up until the end. Even when I explained how simple it would be, just sign over the property, forget about ancient history that no one cares about anymore." The light inched closer to her hiding place. "Did he tell you he begged at the end, pleaded for his life?" Caldwell's voice hardened. "Pathetic, really." The taunt, so obviously false, nearly made Eleanor respond in anger. She caught herself just in time, understanding Caldwell's strategy. Outside, Sam was pinned down by gunfire from Caldwell's men. He'd managed to disable one, but the others had taken well-protected positions. Through his scope, he saw more men returning from the southern ridge. The diversion had run its course. He needed to reach Eleanor, but the direct approach was suicidal. Instead, he worked his way around to the east, using the terrain for cover. If he could reach the hidden entrance... Inside the chamber, Caldwell's patience was wearing thin. "Come out now, Eleanor, and I promise to make this quick. Continue hiding, and things become unpleasant." The lantern light finally reached her corner. Caldwell's face twisted into a triumphant smile as he raised his revolver. "There you are. And with my property, I see." Eleanor stood, still clutching the oilskin packet. "This isn't yours. It's evidence of what you did at Willow Creek." Caldwell shrugged, supremely unconcerned. "Ancient history. No one cares about a few squatters who were in the wrong place." 26 people, Eleanor said, her voice surprisingly steady, "including 8 children." "Casualties of progress," Caldwell replied dismissively. "Now, hand over those papers." "You're a monster." Caldwell's smile never reached his eyes. "You're a hard woman to court, Eleanor. All this trouble when you could have been living comfortably as my wife." "I'd rather die," she said, clutching the oilskin packet of documents to her chest. "That can be arranged." Caldwell's gun shifted toward her. "After you hand over those papers." A voice cut through the darkness from the tunnel entrance. "She's not alone, Caldwell." Sam stood at the chamber entrance, his Winchester trained on Caldwell. His arrival should have been a moment of relief, but Eleanor immediately noticed the dark stain spreading across his left shoulder. He'd been hit during his approach. Caldwell reacted with surprising speed, shifting to use Eleanor as a shield while keeping his gun aimed in Sam's direction. "Mr. Holloway," Caldwell said smoothly. "The hermit with a hero complex. How touching." Sam's rifle remained steady despite his injury. "Drop the gun." "I think not." Caldwell backed up a step, forcing Eleanor to move with him. "Here's what's going to happen. Miss Mason will hand over those documents, and then we'll all walk out of here together. Once I'm safely away, you'll both be free to go." "Like those folks at Willow Creek were free to go?" Sam asked quietly. Something dangerous flashed in Caldwell's eyes. "That was business." "This is business, too," Sam replied. "Justice business." Caldwell's laugh held no humor. "Justice? In the Arizona Territory? Don't be naive, Holloway. The law belongs to men like me, men with money and connections." During this exchange, Eleanor had managed to slip the oilskin packet into her dress pocket. Caldwell, focused on Sam, hadn't noticed. Sam took a single step forward, drawing Caldwell's attention completely to him. It was the opening Eleanor needed. She drove her elbow hard into Caldwell's ribs and twisted away from his grip. Caldwell's gun discharged, the bullet striking Sam in the thigh. He staggered, but remained standing, returning fire as Eleanor scrambled clear. The confined space amplified the gunshots to a deafening roar. Caldwell fired again, missing Eleanor but striking a support beam. Ancient timbers groaned ominously. Sam's return shot caught Caldwell in the shoulder, spinning him around. The mine shaft rumbled as decades-old supports began to give way. "We need to get out," Sam shouted over the noise. "Now!" Eleanor moved toward him, but Caldwell lunged unexpectedly, grabbing her ankle. She fell hard, the small revolver she'd been carrying skittering across the chamber floor. Caldwell reached for it, his face contorted with rage. Sam tried to aim, but his wounded leg buckled beneath him. He wouldn't make the shot in time. Eleanor scrambled desperately toward the gun, reaching it a split second before Caldwell. Without hesitation, she turned and fired. The bullet struck Caldwell squarely in the chest. His expression registered shock before he collapsed to the ground. The mine continued to rumble around them. Sam pulled himself up, limping to Eleanor's side. "Come on!" She stared at Caldwell's motionless form, the revolver still clutched in her trembling hand. "Eleanor!" Sam's voice cut through her shock. "We need to move." Together they stumbled toward the exit as timber supports crashed down behind them. They navigated the narrow passages as the entire shaft began to collapse, emerging into daylight just as a cloud of dust belched from the entrance. Caldwell's remaining men, seeing the mine collapse and hearing the gunfire, had fled. Only silence greeted them as they made their way down to where they'd left their horses. Sam leaned heavily against a boulder, blood soaking his pants leg. Eleanor mechanically retrieved medical supplies from her saddlebag and began treating his wounds. "Never shot a man before," she said, her hands still trembling. "You did what you had to do," Sam replied, wincing as she bandaged his shoulder. "Does it get easier? Taking a life?" Sam looked at her directly, his expression grave. "If it does, that's when you should worry." He met her eyes. "You're still clean, Eleanor. Defending yourself doesn't change that." She nodded slowly. understanding that he was referring to more than her long-ago illness. The documents secure in her pocket, and Caldwell buried in the collapsed mine, they had accomplished what they'd set out to do, but at a cost neither had fully anticipated. As Eleanor finished tending Sam's wounds, they heard the approach of horses. Grey Wolf and his companions appeared from the tree line, taking in the scene with silent assessment. "The truth?" Grey Wolf asked simply. Eleanor patted her pocket, where the oilskin packet rested. "Safe." Grey Wolf nodded, satisfaction evident in his otherwise impassive expression. "Then justice has begun its work." Grey Wolf and his companions guided Sam and Eleanor safely back to Navajo lands, where Sam's wounds could properly heal. Eleanor stayed by his side throughout, her medical knowledge proving invaluable as infection threatened his leg wound. For 2 weeks, they remained as honored guests, sheltered from any pursuit by Caldwell's remaining men. When Sam could travel again, Grey Wolf arranged for a trusted Navajo messenger to deliver the oilskin packet to Judge Wilson in Tucson. The young man returned 5 days later with a sealed letter from the judge himself. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. "He believes us," she said, relief evident in her voice as she read. "The documents match accounts from survivors who've been afraid to speak out. He's issued warrants for Caldwell's men." Sam nodded, a quiet satisfaction settling over him. "Your father's been vindicated." "Yes." Eleanor folded the letter carefully. "And the survivors of Willow Creek will finally see justice." The news spread quickly through the territory. Caldwell's men, without their leader's protection, scattered. Some were arrested, others fled across the border into Mexico. The empire Caldwell had built through intimidation and murder crumbled within weeks. By the time Sam was strong enough for the journey home, the story of Caldwell's downfall had become the talk of every settlement from Tucson to the Colorado border. What surprised Sam most was how many people claimed they'd always suspected something wasn't right about the man. "Funny how courage finds people after the danger's past," he remarked to Eleanor as they prepared to depart. She smiled knowingly. People want to believe they would have stood up if given the chance. Grey Wolf accompanied them to the edge of his territory. "The path ahead is clear," he said. "Caldwell's men have scattered like dust in the wind." Sam extended his hand. "I won't forget what you've done." Grey Wolf clasped his arm. "Nor I, what you have done. The balance between us remains." His dark eyes shifted to Eleanor. "You have found a good woman. Strong medicine." Eleanor's cheeks colored slightly at this assessment. Sam nodded once. "I know it." As they rode away, Eleanor glanced back to see Grey Wolf still watching them, a solitary figure against the vast landscape. "He sees more than most," she observed. "Always has," Sam agreed. 3 months passed. Summer heat gave way to autumn's gentler touch across the Arizona territory. At Sam's homestead, signs of renewal were everywhere. Repaired fences, a freshly whitewashed house, new chickens scratching in the yard. The damage done by Caldwell's men during their search had been substantial, but with Eleanor's help, the place looked better than it ever had. More importantly, it felt different, no longer simply a refuge from the world, but something closer to a home. They sat together on the porch as evening approached, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of purple and gold. The comfortable silence between them spoke of a shared understanding that neither had expected, but both had come to value deeply. "Your father's land is yours now," Sam said finally. "Good farmland, worth something." He'd been meaning to bring this up for weeks, knowing Eleanor would soon need to decide whether to return to her family property or sell it. Land's just land, Eleanor replied, her gaze still on the sunset. Doesn't mean much without the right people on it. Sam studied her profile in the fading light. The bruises had long since healed, and regular meals had restored the health that typhoid had stolen. But it was more than physical recovery he saw. A quiet confidence had replaced the fear that had marked her when they'd first met. "Are you certain?" he asked after a long pause. "About staying?" She turned to face him fully. "I've never been more certain of anything." She reached for his hand, her touch sure and warm. "Unless you're trying to tell me something. Just making sure you know you have choices." A smile touched her lips. "I've made mine." Something settled in Sam then, a certainty he hadn't felt since before the war. The constant vigilance that had become his way of life eased just a fraction, making room for something he'd thought long lost: hope. The wedding took place on a clear October morning, with just a handful of witnesses. Grey Wolf had traveled from his territory to stand with them, along with Dr. Harrison, Abner Green, and a few neighbors who'd come to know and respect the couple during the rebuilding of the homestead. The ceremony was brief, the words simple but meaningful. No grand promises or flowery sentiments, just honest vows between two people who had seen each other at their worst and chosen to face life together anyway. Afterward, as the small gathering shared a meal under the cottonwood trees, a rider approached from the direction of Sulphur Springs. He carried another letter from Judge Wilson. Sam read it silently, then handed it to Eleanor. "He's offering you a position," she said, looking up from the page. "Territorial deputy." "Man needs reliable folks who won't be bought," Sam said with a shrug. "Seems to think I qualify. Do you want it?" Sam considered the question carefully. 6 months ago, he would have refused outright, wanting nothing to do with responsibility for others or connection to the world beyond his fence line. Now, the idea held a certain appeal. "Might do some good," he admitted, "but it would mean travel, time away." "We could make it work," Eleanor said, "especially if I come along sometimes. A doctor's daughter has skills that might be useful." Sam nodded, his decision made. "I'll write him tomorrow." Later that evening, after their guests had departed, they sat together on the porch that had become their favorite spot. The stars emerged one by one in the darkening sky, countless points of light stretching from horizon to horizon. "Never thought I'd see another sunrise like this," Sam said quietly. "Like what?" Eleanor asked. "One that matters." He looked at her. "One worth getting up for." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder. "My father used to say the best view comes after the hardest climb." "Smart man, your father. He would have liked you." She smiled. "Almost as much as I do." As night settled fully around them, Sam realized something had changed within him. The war would always be part of him, as would the years of solitude that followed. But they no longer defined him completely. For the first time in more years than he could count, he found himself looking forward rather than back, wondering not what he was leaving behind, but what might lie ahead. The Arizona Territory remained a harsh land, unforgiving of weakness or poor judgment, but he was no longer facing it alone. And that, Sam reflected, as Eleanor's hand found his in the darkness, made all the difference. Folks sometimes ask me whatever happened to Sam and Eleanor Holloway. Well, they made that homestead bloom like nobody thought possible in such harsh country. Had 2 children who grew up strong and decent. Sam never did take that deputy position, said he'd had enough of dealing with trouble. But he never turned away anyone who needed help either. What I remember most, though, was something Eleanor told me years later. She said, The day I whispered I wasn't clean was the last day I ever felt that way. Seems to me there's wisdom in that for all of us. This world has ways of making good people feel soiled by things beyond their control. But sometimes all it takes is one person who sees past those whispered fears to who we really are. Sam and Eleanor found that in each other, and in doing so, they reminded this old-timer that even in the harshest territory, with the right kind of courage and a willing heart, a person can always find their way home.